Maier has been working with e-commerce and web development for the past 2 decades, and he's here to bring up his topic. Round of applause.
Thanks for joining. Today's presentation is called Swipe Right on Magento. Remember, the people you work for or your clients chose Magento or Adobe Commerce to fulfill a need, or you recommended it as a solution. The ease of operation and performance of its functions determines end-user happiness. This starts with how you chose the functionalities provided by third-party modules and SaaS vendors, and even down to how you organize and plan your project. This way, in the fast-changing e-commerce landscape, we still have tech buyers choosing Magento as a platform. Before we begin, this is the most important slide. You can use this QR code to grab these slides. This way you can be assured this presentation is already online for your viewing consumption, and you do not have to worry about missing any of the content. So that'll scan, it'll come up in the end too. So a little bit about me. I'm Maier Bianchi, founder of Bemeir. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, currently living in New Jersey. I'm a family man with 5 kids, and I've worked with Magento since the end of 2010. Working with Magento helped solidify my passion for e-commerce and helping businesses succeed using technology. I've worked in a lot of roles at merchants, for merchants, both as a staff member, later a freelancer, and then as an agency lord. I've sat in the roles or worked in the shoes of those who actually use e-commerce platforms to fulfill their day-to-day functions. This is at the core of how I approached building solutions both as a developer and as the director of an agency implementing Magento. I've worked with Magento both open source and enterprise versions for 12 years, and I've seen a lot of successful projects and some not so successful projects. But still, I get my hands dirty with the details of how we implement Magento and what pathways we take to get there. We have a very important role in helping our clients choose what third-party software to use in conjunction with developing custom first-party solutions to help them arrive at the most affordable and successful path to market. This was my inspiration for this topic. It is often overlooked how these business decisions, which are very much rooted in the actual code and choices of developers, affect both the satisfaction of end users, platform operators, their staff, and their customers, as well as the developers who day in, day out have to work on a code base. This leads us to what we're going to talk about here in this session. This talk will focus on how to evaluate vendors and their modules, both from the Magento Marketplace and from third-party extension vendors' websites. It's important to know about the vendor and who they are and how their support is so you can determine if this is a partner you want to rely on as you grow your project. You often have to navigate issues that come up, and so communication strategies will be key. It's also important to look at code quality and watch out for certain red flags or patterns that can indicate trouble ahead for you and your team. And when we find these issues, how do we hold them accountable? If you do go for a SaaS solution, often SaaS providers contract out their development to third parties who are often unreachable behind staff members at the SaaS company. It is important to know if a connector module for a SaaS provider is made in-house or by a third party. This can determine how fast or slow you'll get support. In the world of Magento, most of you will be familiar with the idea that the projects we work on are not always the projects that we started. All too often we inherit, gratefully I might add, the fruits of someone else's labor. That is a polite way to say when you're taking over a project, you're often dealing with someone else's mess. And the store owner has less patience for you potentially if the last situation did not go well. So it's important to be able to quickly evaluate what kind of abyss you are staring into before you jump in. This way, you can back it up when you say you'll need to start something over or we need to burn this project with fire. Sometimes you do not have that luxury, so you need to be able to navigate that situation delicately. By doing all these things and planning your project carefully, you can often avoid misleading expectations and ending up in a situation where what you intended to happen is not actually what happened. The disposition of your project and of your team directly affects happiness with the outcomes of an implementation. So third-party vendors. As a developer, we often encounter third-party extension vendors and their modules. We have worked with a lot of them over the years. We've encountered modules we loved, modules we hated, those that were the bane of your existence. But the functionality from those modules is what was needed to be successful for the project or to fulfill a specific business need or function. Even from module to module within an extension provider, sometimes the code quality can vary depending on when it was made and how much attention that specific module gets, if it's popular. We often support our Magento extension providers like we support our favorite sports teams and football clubs. As we interact with their developers, support staff, and public-facing representatives, we become fans or become detractors. One thing is for sure, for any given vendor, there are a lot of opinions, and there are a lot of vendors. So, by what criteria can we evaluate these Magento extension vendors? These are some guidelines you can look at. Experience and expertise. Check the developer's experience and their expertise in developing Magento extensions. Look for their portfolio, past clients, and reviews. Do they have a good reputation in the Magento community? There are opinionated forums and Slack channels where you can get into these questions and really ask people with experience in the community. If they publish their modules on the Magento Marketplace, it means they can at least follow instructions, which is a good sign. We know that their code passed a series of automated checks, such as the Magento coding standard and some others like installation tests on different Magento versions. Next, do they stay up to date with product life cycles and releases for Magento? Meaning, are they up on security? If an exploit is discovered, how quickly do they issue patches or check their extensions for issues with core vulnerabilities? It's important that extension vendors keep their modules current and up to date. This is one of the indicators of quality because it means they are actively engaged in the ecosystem. How's their documentation? If they provide great documentation, it is a good sign they respect developers and customers who work on their products, and they and their support staff are well equipped to support your issues and solve your needs. One hallmark of a good extension developer is do they offer money-back guarantees or easy support access through a portal and are responsive. If you purchase a module and you do your due diligence on the code or find something you do not like, will they respond and fix it? Can you get your money back if it turns out to be a module you don't want or you don't need? There tends to be an industry standard with these guarantees, but it's still a good sign to look out for, which provides certainty in your purchase. An important thing to look for, again, when evaluating extension vendors, which is not so much of a problem anymore, but still a sign of quality, is do they offer private composer packages for proper installation of their modules? This is a standard of the Magento platform, and for example, all extension developers on the Magento Marketplace must do this. In 2023, it is not entirely acceptable for vendors to tell you to download a zip file and drop it into app code. If they're still doing this and do not intend to offer support via Composer, it's not a good sign of quality. If the extension vendor makes modules that interact with the front end, do they offer HUFA compatibility? As we move to an era where HUFA is becoming the gold standard for monolithic Magento 2 front ends, we've seen a shift of support towards HUFA compatibility. If you see an extension developer adopt this trend, it is a sign they are invested in the future of the ecosystem and the platform. But dig deeper as the devil's in the details. HUFA is a paid theme framework, and they maintain a compatibility tracker and an active community. Additionally, while PWA Studio is still a thing, extension providers providing good API endpoints via GraphQL or REST is important for supporting headless or composable commerce builds. Next, we evaluate code quality. Now that you've selected an extension provider and purchased one of their modules, how do you know it's a quality module? 1, does the code pass using tests from the Magento coding standard tool? You can run this tool and issue reports. Here you can see how it falls inside and outside of guidelines. It even has checks against the latest PHP versions using PHP CS. 2, did you ever have a module that's supposed to do one thing while unexpectedly impacting another area of Magento? Probably. An example of this is if it interfered with checkout, but it's only a product page module. Here are some quick tips you could use to spot this. 1, etc events.xml. Look for places that it intersects with core events and fires when it's not supposed to. di.xml. Look for plugins or preferences where it interferes with Magento core behavior. Look at crontab.xml. Some cron jobs can interfere with other core cron processes. This is something that is a sign of trouble. 3, Object Manager. Object Manager is the Magento class responsible for managing all of the instantiation of new objects. So instead of directly instantiating an object using the new statement, Object Manager instead is expected to do it on its own. Object Manager is like an autopilot and is usually never directly used by developers. For example, when a dependency injection is done, Object Manager instantiates a new instance or injects using the existing object automatically. The only common exception is inside factory classes, which are classes ending with the word factory, e.g. testimonial factory. As the purpose of these classes is to instantiate new object instances, sometimes the explicit use of the object manager is needed. 4, if you see the new statement used to create new object instances for classes, this is a hallmark of an inexperienced developer and is a red flag. Magento developers must use dependency injection, and the only common known exception is a try-catch statement. Otherwise, the new statement is forbidden and is a telling sign. 5, Magento 2 architecture is big on separation of concerns. This means, unlike in Magento 1 when it was common to see mixed code, if you see a lot of JavaScript or CSS being mixed into HTML or PHTML files, this is a sign of not following the proper coding standards that is expected of a quality Magento 2 module, and is a sign they may not follow other code standards and best practices. If code is not organized and the standards are not followed, usually it's not only cosmetic. The same care given for those areas usually reflects in the business logic and how well the module's functionalities work. Here's one blanket rule for Magento themes and extensions. Stay out of the forest. The thought process usually goes like this. Hey, let me buy a theme from Theme Forest. It comes with 31 helpful modules that do everything. Magento is not Baskin and Robbins. You do not need all 31 flavors to enjoy your ice cream sundae. These are the death knell of a Magento project. The same usually applies to modules found on Code Canyon. I repeat, do not buy themes from Theme Forest or modules from Code Canyon. They most likely violate the previous tips and will conflict with everything that comes after. You've been warned. It's best to avoid these at all costs. Stay out of the forest. When it comes to SaaS vendors now and their modules, we would evaluate them the same way you would with any other third party. The difference is, if you find a problem, your company may have already signed up for this service or must use this service for business reasons. How responsive is the company providing the extension? How motivated are they to improve the extension? Facebook might not be concerned if their extension does not fit your needs. You can use it as it is, or you can wait for new improvements, or maybe your expected improvements will never be released. You may not always be able to reach their developers. However, some companies launch a module that might be immature or has issues, but they're open-minded and inclined to communicate with you, improve the module, add new features, as you're helping them improve their product and do better in the Magento ecosystem. Sometimes you could take matters into your own hands, submit a pull request, help them improve their module, build rapport strategically with the SaaS company, which can then come in handy later. Always leverage your account managers to go up the chain of command until your needs are addressed because they want to retain your revenue as a customer. Now, we're going to look at how to evaluate inherited projects. When you're a developer joining an existing project or part of an agency taking over an existing code base, you're not always left with documentation for the project or a history of what has happened. You may not even get version control history. It is important to be able to quickly review the situation so you can make recommendations as to what may need to be rebuilt, refactored, or what can be used as it is. One of the first things you can do for an inherited project is run tools and scanners against it. This can help you find out what state it's in from a code quality perspective. Some tools, such as the Magento Upgrade Compatibility tool, which is for Adobe Commerce projects only, but they can help you see what it would take in a report format of what is needed to achieve a Magento upgrade. Additionally, there is a security scan tool available for Adobe Commerce. This tool was last discussed in detail at Meet Magento New York 2022 in Nathan Smith's talk, so you can look that up. A security scan tool that's available to all merchants running Magento 2 is Sansac. Willem de Groot founded this company, and Corey from their core team is actually here at this conference. You could give her a shout if you find her walking around. This is a paid tool, but the insights you gain are invaluable, and merchants will be grateful to know if their store has been exploited or is vulnerable, considering the risks you face greatly outweigh the costs of the software. So this one's a really valuable company because they've provided lots of updates and vulnerabilities over the years. There are entire talks dedicated to just this topic of scanners, so I'll move on to more holistic methods. But once again, the Magento Coding Standard tool can be helpful for evaluating the quality of custom modules that you find in an inherited project. Now we're going to play detective by learning about the previous developers. Were they someone who was quite skilled at PHP, but maybe had no Magento experience? Usually they won't end up following the Magento coding standards. As Magento is highly complex software, you end up having to do a lot of refactoring to fix their work. Were they a full stack developer? Usually, if labeled as such, they could be more focused on back-end or front-end. This sometimes occurs due to the pressure of the industry or the project budget to have one person who has to do everything, which can lead to deficiencies in some noticeable areas based on their preferences and habits. This may tell you, in return, what parts of the project need strengthening. How many different companies or teams have worked on this particular project? Usually, if a project has already been handed over to a second company or team, it means the first one did it badly, the second one is trying to fix it, but has not been able to, and you may be the next in line. This is a red flag. Most likely, you'll not inherit a good technical quality level on the project, as the technical debt and issues have piled up, and the blame game could be in full effect. Break the cycle by calling this out as it is, even if it's an inconvenient truth for everyone. If a project's already running on a server environment, you can look at the file system and see if files are disorganized and if there are unneeded files present. This can tell you how hurried or rushed a team was, or if they maintained the environment properly. You can also check caching settings to see if all cache types are enabled. Sometimes previous developers have issues with one kind of cache. Instead of fixing it, they took a shortcut and disabled it. This is a huge red flag. Check if the project has varnish cache enabled, and if so, try to access a single page multiple times. It's acceptable to have some longer load times on first attempts, but for subsequent ones, we should expect almost instant loads. If this does not occur, it's an indicator of code that's breaking caching due to poor performance of the Magento application. This is why you hear merchants complaining of slow websites despite having proper hosting environments. This is why you may also hear about Core Web Vitals issues from Magento's outdated Luma front-end architecture, and is why many devs are recommending Hoofa and merchants are actively seeking it as a solution, meaning the code on the back end might be optimized, but people might be still saying the site is slow. Now that you've done your evaluation of an inherited project, it is time to face the truth of the matter. You must be honest with yourself and your team to see if taking on this inherited project goes against your standards and principles and continuing it versus starting over. Many agencies have blanket policies to redo projects no matter what. This is due to previous experiences trying to make stalled or failed projects work and ending up at the same conclusion months later after much frustration. Know your tolerance to this and stick to it. Be honest with the merchant and their team, or yourself, with your findings, and be as frank and direct as possible. If they respect your opinion as professionals, they will at least listen to your advice and then take the most appropriate course of action. We must have empathy with the people who find themselves in this situation because it is not always their fault. Now that you've learned and adhered to these principles, you have to set up the right conditions for success. The ultimate determining factors of success are how you plan the execution of your project, manage expectations, and adjust your overall disposition towards the work and the merchant-developer partnership. Personally, I get really fired up about challenges that come with projects. When we believe in a merchant and want their project to be successful, I often let this passion fuel my desire for success and for the success of the project. This can be a positive for motivation, but can also create a reality distortion field. Sometimes in our desire to please, to achieve, to succeed, we often overlook signals that a project was a bad fit, a client was a bad fit, or the timeline or the budget was unreasonable given the circumstances, or simply we failed to manage expectations. Sometimes, despite these risks, we succeed anyway. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes saying no to something that's wrong leads to the right yes. Through intense moments of hard work, sweet successes, or bitter failures where there are no winners, we learn a sense of wisdom that we can call experience. Planning, open communication, and knowing your limitations are critical behaviors to follow. Sometimes circumstances go beyond our control, but the majority of the time, following these tactics wins the day. Your team will thank you, your clients will thank you, and you will remain happy and fulfilled in your work. Remember, always swipe right on Magento and keep the Magento and Adobe Commerce ecosystem strong. By following best practices and ensuring great projects and outcomes, you'll do a public service to the platform and the community and help ensure that merchants can successfully use Magento, Adobe Commerce, MageOS, Mage 1 LTS, and all the other forked flavors of Magento for years to come. You and your work are the engine that keeps Magento alive. And I'll put that last slide back, sorry. So yeah, questions, open to questions or comments. Have about 4 minutes for that.
Did you create that AI with Midjourney?
Yeah, the photos, except me, were used in this presentation were created with Midjourney AI. And I put the prompts in the presentation if you want to grab it, of what words led to that picture and what I was thinking at the time of madness making this. So yeah, if there's any other questions, if not, thanks everyone.
How often do you see or inherited like issues and red flags that you decide to push past and still decide to take on?
Most of the time, for better or for worse. I would say that, once again, it really has to do with the details, and that's why it's important to look and why it's important to look really closely and talk to and learn about the situation before you jump in with 2 feet, because you could be there could be something you find out 10 steps into it that you wish you had known ahead of time, which might have prevented a whole bunch of problems. So I would say, like, better to talk to people about what's happened, or like, for example, 2 situations, right? If you're someone working for a company and you have to tell your boss some uncomfortable information, better to have that conversation, because if you don't, it'll just come back to bite you later. Vice versa, if you're an agency working with a client, if you don't have those tough conversations up front, everything could seem great, but then you could run into a problem that really is a showstopper for the relationship sometime inside the project. So those things have happened, and they're not always comfortable, but better to get it out of the way. Diffuse the bomb.
Thank you for the presentation. If we tell too honestly to a client that we have so many problems in the code, I feel that the client gets a little tense, and when we start working on the project further, then he's always like, okay, I feel that if we tell too much truth about the code, then the confidence of the client really goes down, and then he starts thinking too many things. So is there a way that we can build the confidence with the client, because we'll tell him, okay, this is not looking good, right? So he'll feel like, okay, maybe I'll go to Shopify, then I'll not use Magento, right? So what do you have to say on that?
That's a really good conundrum. I would say that the way if I have to approach that, is maybe it's the way you issue that statement or how you provide it as a report, or you say, hey, like, well, you've given me the problem, what's the solution? So maybe coming to them with solutions in hand and assurances that you can work past those issues, or here's how we're going to work past those issues, this is what's going to cost you, this is when it's going to be done. I feel like some people don't want to know all the details, but at least maybe they'll appreciate your honesty or why you took the time to provide that, and that could go a long way to building the trust that, hey, I have problems with my Magento, but these guys will help get it done, and so that's kind of the way I would like to see it, because you can't always defend, hey, why they want to go for another platform. They may just run into other problems there. So I would say focus on that, and you can control solutions, and it might help. That's at least practically I would approach that. All right, cheers.
Wait, I have a question of my own. I'm
okay,
sorry. You haven't mentioned anything about like the number of extensions, number of integrations on the project, or like the mix of the vendors that a project could have, which you might have to consider when taking on a project?
Oh, have I? And the question is?
Yeah, you haven't mentioned any of that. Doesn't that matter? What do you think about that?
I would say it matters insofar as, like I said, there are some vendors that have better quality modules than others. So sometimes you have to recommend substituting one system for another that you could be more comfortable with as a developer, or hey, this works, it still fulfills your business functions, but by using more extensions from one provider, we can consolidate the support. Sometimes there's business reasons to do that. And so, for example, the theme forest part, or stay out of the forest, was about the fact that those projects have the kitchen sink already thrown at them from the start by an unknown developer, and then when you go to add a product from a known developer, everything else breaks because the first thing broke it. Therefore, I would say when you come into something and there's so many modules by different vendors, you could start by approaching, do we need all of these and can we consolidate vendors? Yes, there's a cost to that, so there would have to be a good reason to, such as a code conflict, but yeah, that's something that has been encountered for sure. Or there's like one problem thing that you have to get out of there. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Let us give a round of applause.
Thank you.